Hello, welcome back to CS++. This is lesson 4 in our intro to programming using JavaScript. And today we're going to look at iteration, or using loops to repeat chunks of code. So looking at what we're going to do today, we're going to look at some for loops. We're going to look at while loops, so two different kind of loops. And then we're going to see how we can validate some information using loops. And then we're going to talk about when we should use a for loop and when we can use a while loop. And we'll see how we can build a string with a loop, or accumulate a sum, or a couple other things like we saw before with turning a string into a number. And for our assignment, we're going to do a couple things. We're going to get input, and this time instead of just checking to see if it's a positive number or not, we're going to keep asking over and over again until they put in a valid input. And then we're going to loop through, and we're going to take some numbers from 1 to a certain value, and we are going to basically print those out with a comma in between, except not one after the very last number. And we're also going to use that loop to sum up all the numbers from 1 to whatever number they put in, 1 to n. So let's get started. So the first part is the for loop. So as you can see here, a for loop is a little more in depth than what a while loop is going to be. The while loop is literally just an if statement that keeps going over and over and over again, except it's going to use the word while. A for loop is going to have 3 parts inside of the parentheses. It is going to have an initialization of some kind of counter. So in this case, we're using I, and we're setting it to 1. And then it's going to have a condition, and it's going to keep doing this while this condition is true. And then the last part is going to be an increment or a decrement of that counter. And you can see here that each one of these things is separated by a semicolon, right, not a comma. And then again, the stuff inside of here will happen while this is true. So this one will be 1, it'll print 1, then it'll add 1. So this doesn't happen until actually you finish the first time through the loop. And then it will be 2. 2 is not less, or it still is less than or equal to 5, so it'll say 2, 3, 4. It'll be 5. 5 is less than or equal to 5, so it'll print 5. Add 1 to 6. 6 is not less than or equal to 5, so it will stop. So it'll continue on with the code outside of here. So again, initialize a counter, have a condition set, and then update that counter. And you can do adding 1, subtracting 1, adding 5, multiplying by 2. Really anything works here. We haven't really seen too much of this right here, the plus plus. What this means is add 1 and save it back into itself. You could have just as easily wrote I equals I plus 1, or I plus equals 1. And again, the while loop we already saw, this was an if statement, just keep going over and over and over again until this is not true. So while this is true, keep doing this stuff over and over and keep checking every single time you finish this block statement. And we're going to run into some errors here because we are going to sometimes get stuck in a loop. So it might freeze up, it might keep printing out something on your screen over and over again, but we want to try to avoid getting stuck in loops here. And we're going to do this in the test, but we're going to make sure that we are getting some input that is valid. So when do we use a for loop? Well, when we know the exact number of iterations. So if we know we're doing it 10 times or 50 times or 100 times, or if we know something like we have a list of things all stored together, we might want to go through the length of that list. So maybe the length changes, but we know that it's the number of times the same as the length. Or if you want to go through every single letter of a string. If you want to count from A to B, right? Those are all some examples here. You could always use a while loop, right? All the while loop. The for loop can be written with all different parts of a while loop. But maybe if you don't know how many iterations there are, or if you're waiting for a condition to change, or like we'll see in the test, validating user input, or repeating until something is correct, like a number guesser game. So we can also use this loop to go through and build things, right? So this one we're just using results as a string. So you'll see here we set an empty string, and then as we go through, we're just concatenating 1, and then 2, and then 3. So you can actually kind of build strings this way. And then we'll see this sum example inside of the code as well. And just a reminder, when we're taking input, you want to make sure that if you want it to be a number, you want to make sure you parse int it, and then you can check to see if it is a number or not. So let's jump into the tests. So for this one, if you go to index.html, this one is literally just a blank page. So instead of clicking a button, you can just refresh the page to open it. So you still want to open up your HTML preview. And when that opens, you will see no button, just a little bit of text. So it says open the console or check the alerts to see your output. So we'll leave that open. I can close this one. And then let's jump over to our script.js. So again, here we have detailed steps to follow to get this to work. So for this one, we need to ask the user for a positive number, and we're going to use a prompt. But we also want to use parse int to convert it to a whole number. So again, if we want, we could do this in one step. We can say let num equals parse int, and then inside that we can ask for the prompt, matching exactly what we want here. Enter a positive number, colon. In this case, we don't always have that colon. This one we do. And then for the next step, we want to validate that this is true. So now, if it's not a number, or if it's 0, or if it's negative, we want to keep saying invalid input, but we want them to be able to enter it again and again and again and again. So instead of using an if statement, we're going to use a while loop. So while, and now similar logic to our if statement we did last unit, is NaN that number. So if that number is not a number, or that number is less than or equal to 0, then we want to keep asking them over and over and over again. So step 1 is alert that this is invalid. And then we also want to ask them for a new number, because if we don't ask them for a new number, then there's no way for them to update num. So you're just going to keep saying invalid input, invalid input, invalid input. And it's going to be very frustrating because you're going to have to just close your web browser to get that off. So we want to make sure that we update num. So it's basically the same thing here, right? Num, except we already have the let defined. So we can just say num equals parse int prompt, enter a positive number. And now it lets them enter a number. Now it checks again on their number. If it's not, it's invalid input, checks again, checks again, checks again. When they get it right, it will continue on with the code. So now that we have that, we can do step 3, which is build a string of comma-separated values. And what that's going to look like is we first are going to need a string to hold that list. So we're going to say let, we'll call it list. And if you want to concatenate something on, you want to make sure that you start with an empty string. So we could just use quote, quote. We also want to calculate the sum. So let's create a variable called sum, and we'll start that at 0, assuming that if there is no numbers, it'll be 0. And then we can add on to that. So for this one, we're just going to loop through from 1 until whatever number they put in above. So we're going to use a for loop here. So here, we are going to let I, we usually use I, which stands for increment. Everyone who programs knows that this is usually used for a counter. We're going to start that at 1 because we're going from 1 to n, which is their number. So we're going to keep going until I is less than or equal to that number that they put in. And each time we're going to add 1, so I++. And now inside of here, we can sum up that number. So let's do that one first because it's simple. So sum, and the shorthand way to write it is sum plus equals I, which is 1, then 2, then 3. And then again, if you wanted to, you could say sum equals sum plus I. Those would be the same thing. Plus equals is just a shorthand way to write that. And then for the next one, the trick here is that we only want to put a comma after the first, second, third, all the way up until the second to last number, right? We don't want to put a comma after this. So basically what we want to do is we want to add that comma on to the next one. So there's a couple of different ways we could do this. So you could say that if the I is equal to the number, that's the last one, so don't do that. So what we can do is we can say, well, if I equals the current num, right? So if we're going from 1 to 10, when I is 10, we don't want to put a comma at the end. We just want to concatenate the number. So we can say list plus equals I, which would be that number. And if it's not the last one, if it's every other one, we can just do an else statement. And this would be list plus equals I plus, and then we'll do a comma and a space. So again, that's only going to happen on the everything except the very last one. So that should work perfectly, right? So the first one, it's going to be a comma and a space, and then on the last one, just the number. So a lot of ways to do that, but we'll do it that way. And then the final part was to alert these numbers. So we can alert the list. We didn't have to put any text in there. Then we want to alert sum, and this one we wanted to do sum colon space, and then concatenate that sum that we created. And we can try that out. So we can open that in our web browser, refresh it. So now as soon as you refresh, there's no button. So now you can enter a positive number. You can enter something like a string, invalid input, close, and it'll come up again. -1, invalid input, positive number, let's go 10. And so now the first thing it does is lists it, and there's a comma after each one and not the last one. And then the next one is the sum, which is 55. So that is a for loop here and a while loop to verify that we keep going. So again, to check this, you can click on your source control fork here, give it a commit message, and then you can commit and push back to github.com. And when you do push it back to github.com, then it will trigger that auto grader. So you can come back over to your GitHub repository and refresh that. And you should see a little yellow or gold dot, or this could be a red X, meaning you failed at least one test, or a green check, meaning you passed them all. But you could click that and click details, or you can click actions, and then you can click on the very top one right here. And then you can see the summary right here, which will show up below, or you can click on auto grader and then dive into the test. Sometimes if you do fail test, you can dive in to see exactly what you failed. But this one works perfectly, and you get 100. So if you didn't, then you can go back into your code spaces, and you can try again. So that was iteration, so using for loops and while loops. In the next unit, lesson 5, we're going to look at arrays, or how we can keep a list of variables together in one data structure. I will see you then.